Season 3, friends. We're getting older. Our wrinkles are showing. Oh man, what can be said? Oh my. Well, lots of things, honestly. Welcome back to the ecoChristian podcast, where we're exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. With me, Caleb Cray Haynes, and to kick things off today, Derrick Weston has returned, and we are chatting about the power of God. But first, before we get into all that, because there's lots of things there, I do have something I want to tell you about and a special invitation to share. Because y'all, I'm so excited to be part of a team hosting a conference happening this fall on all the things we talk about right here in this podcast. It's called Creation Care Summit 2.0, Holiness in All Creation. It's happening in Kansas City, Missouri, this October, the 14th through the 16th. It's a Tuesday through Thursday, so you pastors can get back to your churches and everyone else can get back to their pickup soccer games or whatever you're doing over the weekend. There's going to be a just wonderful crew of speakers, including folks from the Evangelical Environmental Network, Creation Justice Ministries, and Arasha USA, along with some amazing creation care gurus and close friends of mine. It's just going to be so much fun. But wait, there's more. We are partnering with Nazarene Theological Seminary, who will be hosting special lectures with the amazing Dr. Norman Wiersbe, who we've had on the show last season. And friends, we're going to be learning together, eating together, laughing together, hopefully, and getting our hands in the soil together. And so the best part, you guys, is that you're invited, and I'm putting the link below. And if you're listening to this, you, my friend, are invited. There has never been a more crucial time in history for the people of God to come together around this work toward healing the earth. This is the time, friends. And yes, I know it's a long drive. Yes, I know it's the middle of the week. Yes, as always, all the reasons are there as to maybe what's in the way. But friends, we are long past the point of the work ahead being convenient or being easy. As environmental issues reach new heights, new records are broken every month, species face new levels of extinction, we as the church cannot wait to engage in this critical work of holiness in the earth. And so please, my friends, prayerfully consider joining us this October 14th through 16th. Would love to see you there. I'm going to link the page below. And if you want to know more from the horse's mouth, as they say in the South, hit me up at ecochristianpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to just chat about it with you. Creation Care Summit 2.0, Holiness in All Creation. Would love to see you there. Okay, now let's hang out with my friend Derrick Weston with Creation Justice Ministries and talk about the power of God from extractive theology to transformative faith. My real copy here that I found. So
nice.
Yeah. I was thinking of the power of God, and I was thinking about there's so many crossovers when we start talking about power. And anyway, but I don't know why, but the first thing that came to my mind earlier as I was thinking about talking with you about this resource, and I was thinking about did you ever watch He-Man back in the day?
Oh,
like
yeah.
I have the power.
Yeah, heck yeah.
And I was just like, this is so put into like what we think about when we think about like like power. And they actually did a really I'm gonna say epic reboot of He-Man on Netflix a few years back. um
I remember that.
do you remember that? And I didn't like grow up watching He-Man or anything necessarily, but I really loved it because it was like all about it was like all about the ladies. It was like a He-Man
Yeah.
does female reparations empowerment.
Yes.
Which is, I feel like, kind of some fodder here we could really get into by talking about the power of God. But anyway, all the controversy. But
Yeah.
yes. So today, my friends, I am rejoined by the Derrick Weston, who, aside from basically being on the ecoChristian Justice League, he is the, I guess, still the director of Theological Education Information. Is that still officially? We haven't changed that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, we
Okay.
haven't. Yeah, and one title per year.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And yes, and so yeah, so glad to have you back here, man.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the
Yeah.
invite.
Oh man, so much fun. So we've sort of set aside. We wanted to do some of this recording. I think we talked about it first in the spring, and it just didn't happen. But long story short, one of the things that I've had the privilege of working with Derek on over this last year is this resource called The Power of God from Extractive Theology to Transformative Faith. And it is the 2025 annual resource for churches, for Christians across traditions that seeks to inspire, educate, and equip us right toward ecological care. And so some of you may remember in 2024 last year was the Plastic Jesus, which I'm going to say was a mega hit. I'm going to say it was a mega hit. And I just remember all the photos that someone took of this little plastic Jesus figurine
Yeah.
hanging out in different spots. Are you aware of like the miniature Jesus trend that's happening or that has
N-
occurred?
No, no. What is this?
Well, anyway, we're in the weeds, but yeah, it just occurred to me, which I don't know how long this has been going, but apparently a while, long enough for my wife to like crinkle her nose at me and be like, "You didn't know about the micro little Jesus trend, whatever," because I noticed when I'm tucking my daughter in at night, she has this little Jesus, like I'm talking like maybe it's an inch tall, and
Okay.
it's like a little plastic Jesus, and it's like hanging out by her bed. And then later, I'll like see it in the bathroom, and it's just like she's like taking it with her around the house. And I was like, "Babe, have you seen this little Jesus, the little Jesus that that Story's carrying around?" And and she was like, "You don't know about little Jesus?" And I'm like, she's like, "That's a thing." And anyway, so
I didn't know either. I
yeah,
didn't know.
since then I've like seen several around out in the world where so Jesus is
Is this an
present.
elf on the shelf kind of thing, or
Maybe.
is like
Yeah.
is Jesus
Yeah.
watching us everywhere?
Yeah.
Is that supposed to be the thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely. That's it. Um anyway, this year is the Power of God resource, and it it just it's we so Derek and I were just talking before I hit record about I guess what did you say, abstract. I feel like
Yeah.
it's a little it didn't come with the plastic Jesus figurine. It's a little more abstract, and I think all the more reason why I think this is a fun conversation for us to have.
Yeah, it's like when a band like has a really popular album and like then their second album is kind of like more artsy and
Yeah.
moody.
Yeah.
This was like my second album.
Yeah.
My because it was my second time doing the annual resource and like Plastic
Yeah.
Jesus was the hit and
Yes.
Power of God was sort of this more abstract moody thing.
Yeah.
Um but I do think that like, part of that was intentional. Part of that was like we used a phrase, the power of God, that had, for those of us with evangelical backgrounds, had maybe a little bit of baggage, had like a little bit
Mm.
of like, um, this is a phrase I've heard that maybe I haven't always loved the way it's been used, and maybe we can reframe it in some ways.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's not as immediately accessible as like
Yeah.
Plastic Jesus was.
Yeah, and I will say that definitely I remember the room when that was being thrown around, and I will say that I feel like there's definitely some intentionality to that. And I'm not going to say it's been controversial, but maybe in just the entire, not any more than the entire notion, I guess, of the power of God is controversial, and
Yeah,
I think that's part of the gift. And there is like I really feel like the resource itself is very rich, and there's so much in there. But just thinking about the power of God, you could almost say that how one talks about or interprets meaning around the power of God and what kind of power God exhibits kind of determines what kind of Christian you're talking to, I
it
think,
it
in
really
in a
does.
way.
It really does.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, in many ways, it's kind of a defining characteristic that kind of marks ecclesiology, theology differences in different traditions and that sort of thing. Maybe that's fair to say, but
Yeah,
um,
I would agree with that. I would say that the ways that we have understood God's power directly affects the ways that we use power and the way that we see human power. And so, for so much of Christian history, particularly the colonial parts of Christian history, we have seen power as taking over, power as claiming ownership, power as domination, um,
hmm,
which is really not the ways that God's power shows up, particularly in the scriptural witness, and especially in the person of Jesus.
hmm,
So, when we start to think about how does power show up for those of us who care deeply about creation, how does power show up for those of us who care deeply about justice, that's a different kind of power. That's a different expression of power
hmm,
than the kinds of power that have um, been associated with, again, kind of Christian with colonialism, with crusades, but
hmm,
even sort of like the ways that we see Christian nationalism kind of adopting this notion of power for
hmm.
that's connected with military and connected with like a certain ideological and racial purity. And there's really a whole lot to dig into when you start thinking about how do we even approach power as followers of Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if you just, I know we're scratching the surface. I'm trying to decide how deep a dive to go here, but it's just like, yeah, there is so much there, and you did. I really feel like such a really great job with the theological framing of this, and yeah, I wonder if you'd just say a little bit more about that and how we find ourselves getting into this connection between God's power and environmental care, more kind of how we getting here.
Yeah, I mean, and it starts from the very beginning, right? That we have in the first creation story this word, dominion, right?
Mm,
That God creates the world, then God creates humanity, and God gives us dominion over the fish of the sea, birds of the air, and
mm,
every living thing that moves on the earth. And that understanding of dominion has easily turned from dominion to domination. That the natural world is here for us to dominate, for us to use as we see fit, to exploit, to extract. And one of the things that I think is really helpful, though, is if we see the two creation stories in Genesis hand in hand, because in the second creation story in Genesis 2, God creates the human, God creates Adam from Adamah. So first off, you have God creating humans from the soil. So saying that like we are intimately connected to the soil, and then God giving Adam this charge, which we typically translate to keep and till, but those Hebrew words can mean things like guard or protect or observe and serve. So those words have a deeper connotation of what our relationship is supposed to be to the garden that is the earth. And that is not a using our power to dominate, but using our power to serve and guard and protect and observe. I
Mm.
think we start if we start at the beginning. We already start to see that there's an understanding that God gives us a certain amount of power, but that power is always tethered to some kind of responsibility. And that's, I think, a thing that we often don't like. I'm a comic book nerd, and one of my all-time favorite is Spider-Man. And Spider-Man, kind of the tagline for Spider-Man is with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's and I don't know how I didn't get that into the resource somehow.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not there. I don't.
but I do think that that's one of the things that when we see throughout the scriptural witness of like when God gives humans power, it's always with some sort of limitation. It's always with some sort of like, but don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Like of there's always some sort of boundaries. And I think one of the things that we have lost sight of, particularly with technology, is like and the ways that we treat the planet is we think of the planet as limitless, and therefore our power over it can be limitless. Instead of thinking about we just what was it a couple weeks ago reached the threshold point of what our natural resources can recycle in a year, which means that for the remainder of the year we are kind of running the planet at a deficit. So that's thinking about those kinds of limitations, thinking about like the ways that we use power, but understanding it being coupled with responsibility, I think is just really important.
Oh man, that's just. I'm like busy typing your quote here. Like that's really good. I was like, was that in there? I don't even remember that. Yeah, when God something like when God gives power, it always comes with some limitation, and oh man, that's I feel like that's everything right there because I think we want to talk about power in the way of limitlessness
Mhm.
and and I always think it's funny with that you mentioned the tree in the garden, like the forbidden fruit, right? Like the audacity that God would create something that's not for our consumption.
Right, right.
Like we're
How
just
dare
upset about
God?
this. Yeah. Yeah, you mean that's not for us? It's just yes, the whole thing. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, you get it, in the resource, we get into Sabbath and sacrifice and service, and there's so much there. And we were talking about the title, but even like, to be honest, even the cover is a little deceiving because we're grabbing at straws here, people. We're trying to figure out, okay, how do we convey
Yeah,
this, and
yeah.
and it's a play on words, and on the cover is, I like to say that, and of course you can't see this if you're listening at home, but I like to say that this is our throwback, like, Stranger Things cover. Like, it's kind of a, like, I had this out at Earth Day Festival, and someone was like, "Oh, is this from like the '80s or whatever?" And I was like, "No, but it is cool like that." But anyway, so there's the other thing, all that to say, there's kind of the second aha or abstract thing or things happening here is the play on words of like power is energy,
Yeah.
and of course we think about the power company and that sort of thing. And to be honest, I've always thought it's why so many have struggled with interfaith power and light,
Mm. Hmm.
I love those people,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
maybe too soon, but you know, but that's where our minds go when we talk about power as
Yeah.
an English term.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think at the core of this resource, is an ecological conversation about the tangible, environmental, material ramifications of God's power at work within the lives of God's people. And I would say that what we're trying to say and what you're putting flesh on here is the kind of servant, loving power under, right, that we might say that Jesus exhibits in the world in the Gospels, and we find ourselves actively participating in the healing of creation through this kind of power. And so, yeah, that so the tagline is from extractive theology to transformative faith. And Derek, I just have to know, what is extractive theology?
So that is the million-dollar question, right? I think it goes back to things like the doctrine of discovery. It goes back to these ideas of
Mm,
domination that we can take from creation, that we can take, that we can deforest, that we can hunt things to extinction, that we can blow the tops off of mountains to mine, that we can suck all of the oil out of the planet's core, that we can just take and take and take.
mm,
And that again, that is rooted in this idea that God gave us the planet to do with as we please, which is again like wildly unbiblical to think that way. But I do feel like that's a lot of and the other kind of harmful piece of this extractive theology is the idea that it doesn't matter what we do to creation because will be whisked away to some other
mm,
space at some point when Christ returns, and that this won't have mattered, that
mm.
this world that God created in love won't have mattered. So we can just take and take and take and take and take from it because it doesn't in the end it's not really going to amount to anything.
Right. It's like escapist theology gives way to extractive theology.
Exactly, because like it doesn't matter what we do to the planet if this isn't the end destination.
Mm,
But again, not only is that like wildly unbiblical from the beginning of the Bible, it's wildly unbiblical at the end of the Bible when we see in Revelations 21 where the city of God descends from heaven and God makes God's dwelling amongst the people. And I kind of wonder, like, if we do take, there's so much imagery in Revelation and the
mm,
revelation of John, and so like I don't want to. That's a whole different conversation. But if we took seriously that the end goal, which shows up in Revelation, it shows up in Isaiah, it shows up in various points throughout the Bible, that God's end goal is to dwell among us. What what then does that change about our understanding of our responsibility to God's creation? I think about like when I lend someone something, that there is a responsibility that like at the very least I'm going to get it back in the condition in which I gave it.
mm.
I love my friends who will like borrow my car and bring it back with a full tank of gas, or like bring
Yeah.
it back like they'll like I
Yeah.
took it I took it through the car wash. It's like, oh wow, okay,
Yes.
that is above and beyond. But I think about, we're getting to a point with creation where we need to start thinking about that, like if we really want God to dwell among us, and I think that's exactly what I want. Like I want God to be pleased with what we've done with God's creation.
Yeah.
And that dwelling among us would be a joyful reunion of God's
Yeah.
people, and God's creation. So extractive theology is really, I mean, one, it's wildly unbiblical, but it's also just, it kind of feeds into all of our worst impulses of consumerism and greed and violence. And like, I mean, how much of the violence of this world has been about the ownership of land, and about the ownership of the resources of that land. And it that extractive theology has been the impetus for so many of the horrors,
Mm.
oftentimes done in the name of Jesus. And it's really important that we kind of move away from that, to something that is more generative and life-giving.
Mm. So many, so many dash lights are coming on as you were saying it. I was like, oh man, we can't do them all. But yes, I think that's such a great. I think you captured that really well. And I was just thinking, as you're talking about, the parables at the end of Matthew, and about that the master returns, and the problem is that the servants have sort of botched the landing on on the master returning and finding that things have been cared for,
Yeah.
things have been used shrewdly and wisely. And that, it's like, how are we doing the math with these parables and not
Mhm.
seeing the ecological nightmare over here? It's like, wow, there is a great disconnect there for sure. And the other one that popped in my head, right, is out of, I think, First Thessalonians 4, maybe, that always gets quoted. I'm going to say specifically in evangelical circles, around this proof text about meeting God in the air, and
Mhm.
it's this,
Yeah.
and Paul's using, I'm going to say, heavy metaphorical language, talking about the return of Christ, but it's a kingly, it's a very, like, this is what it looks like when kings return. And what would happen is that we would go out of the doors, uh,
Mhm.
out to meet the king and be a part of that entourage. Probably pretty similar to how it went with Jesus arriving in Jerusalem for
Mm.
Passover,
Yeah.
on Palm Sunday, where he was sort of greeted with this throng of people waving those branches, Hosanna, right? Save us,
Hmm.
King, Son of
Hmm.
David. And then they came in with him. And so, anyway, yeah, I was
Yeah.
recently I was recently grilling out with some people, and that was a whole thing that came up. And I was like, I don't think that's it. But anyway, yes, yeah. And one of the real life examples, I feel like right now, kind of looking at some of the stories we mentioned and the resource and stuff, and I was just really, and as you were talking, really struck by, and I don't know if you've kept up with the whole AI nonsense
Mm.
in Memphis, in
Hmm.
Tennessee, where I live,
Yeah.
and it's just speaking about, extraction and all that. And it's probably worth a whole episode there. But there's so much happening there in already, really kind of poor neighborhoods, and people who are already suffering under the brunt. It's environmental racism, like
Absolutely.
textbook.
Absolutely.
And anyway, it's like, man, where's the church in these spaces? Like this, these are the kind of
Mm.
moments where, that I feel like is like our opportunity as Christians to sort of stand in the gap for these people in these places, and to recognize, oh, this is part of what really we need to be up to in the world, is speaking out against some of these things. And so,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
yeah, before, I'd kind of like to chat for a minute about maybe some of the stories in the resource briefly. but
Hmm.
but before we do that, I wonder if you offered a really great sermon starter, and I wonder if you, at a Mark 5, and you sort of reference, you reference the bleeding woman, and Jesus is like, hey, who touched me, and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
I wonder if you give us a little teaser there of kind of a connection you were making.
Yeah, I was looking, as when we started working on this, I started thinking about, doing word studies of all the places where power shows up, and this is one that like as I was researching, we know this. I think those of us who've been in the church for a long time know this story of this woman who's been hemorrhaging, and physicians have exploited her, and nothing's gotten better. And she, we have this famous phrase that she touches the hem of his garment, of Jesus's garment. That's my old King James. Um, and she's healed, and Jesus, in that moment that Jesus is healed, there's a crowd around him, but he stops and he says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples were like, "Dude, there's all
Everybody. Yeah.
everyone's
Yeah.
touching you."
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
says, "I felt power leave me."
Mm,
And thinking about, like, particularly for those of us in the Christians in the Western world, like, what's it going to take for healing to happen for our planet? It's going to take some power leaving us. It's going to take us using some of the power that we have, whether that's the power of our voice, the power of our actions, the power of our words, the power of our money, the ways that we spend our money.
mm,
There's going to have to be some power that leaves us for the
mm.
healing of this world that has been exploited for so long, and is kind of like reaching out in desperation, because we are getting to a point of desperation with
Yeah.
our climate changed world. And man, I have to give some credit in this to one of the CJM interns, who really did a great paper that she wrote about sort of this story about bleeding, and like, what if we started to see the world as this bleeding woman. And so I was moved by that, and that image really haunts me. And so that was one that I felt like, boy, I mean, not only I'm actually planning on preaching this from this text in a couple months, but like, man, that got my like preacher imagination firing, in some
Mm.
ways that, like, I really wanted to share that with the readers of our resource.
Yeah, there's so much there, and I hope the preachers listening are like, I gotta get me that resource. Yeah, that is, yeah, that's
It is.
powerful. I'm gonna say, no pun intended. So yeah, yeah, kind of speaking of that, kind of moving. So we share. I think we share like
Mhm.
three different stories in the resource about different communities and ways that we believe that they're embodying the power of God and doing that work and kind of continuing the trail here for a second. But one of those stories is out of Arizona and the struggle to protect Oak Flat that we wrote about, and I think that was it's probably maybe late 2024 when we're kind of writing this and pulling this together. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this situation with Oak Flat, I did do an episode on this not too long ago because fast forward back in May, our Creation Justice board met in Phoenix and had the rare and honorable opportunity to kind of be in protest and solidarity with Apache Stronghold and that situation there, where there's this, these indigenous people with their worship site, that's under threat from copper mining, and really, and there's just it's just like who are the voices, who are the people standing for them, being with them. And so, Derek, I know that you and I remember had the opportunity to walk together, sort of march together during that event and that protest and that
Mhm.
vigil, and we sang songs and prayed prayers and lit candles and all that. And you and I haven't really had the chance to reconnect after everything now. And if you're tracking in the news, right, the Supreme Court decided not to defend and take up the case of protecting Oak Flat. And so, anyway, I'm sharing all this to say, sort of naming something really sort of vulnerable here. I think about the conversation about feeling powerless and powerlessness, and thinking about power going out of us, and just sort of naming something here that feels important. Yeah, and it might sound a little heretical, maybe, but I'm just fleshing this out a little bit that the power of God sometimes feels like
Mm.
powerless in a way.
Yeah.
Anyway, does any of that make
Yeah. Oh
sense?
man. I mean, sometimes the power of God is hanging on a cross. I mean, that's
Mm,
I mean, that's that's Jesus at his most powerful. And sometimes the power of God feels like we're in losing battles, but we're on the right side of history, and we're on the side of life, and we're speaking on the alongside. And honestly, in that space, it wasn't even the speaking alongside, it was the listening. It was listening to the voices of children and people who have been in this fight for decades saying that this land means something to us. And
mm,
while it might mean something financial to a
mm,
corporation, it will never mean what it means to us spiritually. That was powerful. I mean, to hear those stories was powerful.
mm,
And yeah, I mean that's the real, kind of paradoxical nature of God's power, is that so often these things end in what looks like defeat. And so often these things end with what looks like brokenness and defeat, and it looks like a cross. And
mm,
and we have to trust that there will be resurrection, that there will be new life, and it's an act of faith. It's an act
mm,
of believing that one of the things that differs from God's power and the ways that we often use power is that God's power is slow. God's power is small, oftentimes, and incremental. And
mm.
God takes God's time. Um, and God's
Yeah.
timing and our timing rarely look the same. But
Mm,
I that was such a meaningful experience, and so I'm really
mm,
glad that we both highlighted that story in our resource, and that we had that opportunity to march, to listen, to sing. That
mm,
was sometimes we are so caught up in an end result that we miss that God was there in the journey. God was there in the process with us. And so, this isn't done. And there have been a lot of things. There've been a lot of things with this new administration that have just felt like losses for creation. But the
mm,
phrase and the quote, "Trust in the slow work of God," has been in my mind and heart for the last month or so. And it's just something
mm.
that I'm kind of clinging to right now. It's like,
Yeah.
it's hard, but
Yeah.
I'm trusting in the slow work of God.
That's a good word. That is a really good word, and I'm gonna put that on a sticky note, stick it right there, because that is what we that is a big part of what we need, It's like yes, yes, do the work, yes, do the work, but also trust in the slow work of God, and it doesn't always, and it may not look like we think it ought to look, and so Emily and I don't know if everyone's seen this or no one's seen this or whatever, but Emily and I have been going through this like recently aired season 5 or whatever of The Chosen, and I think they do a pretty good job. If we're lining it up against other theatrical, situations of Jesus and Holy Week and all that. But what has just been striking so much in this one is just how much obviously Pharisees and the crowds are kind of missing a lot of it, but even Jesus' closest followers, maybe save one or two, maybe save like Mary, are just missing the whole thing. And Jesus is deeply sad by this in their portrayal, and is like, guys, I've like this is not a parable. This is happening, and just how they live their life so close to Jesus, like bodily, and they still
Yeah.
missed it.
Yeah.
How much more, there's so much irony how we can watch these shows or read these gospels and nod our head and think, "Yep, that's power. That's Jesus," and they missed it. Those
Those
dummies,
stupid
they missed
disciples.
it. Those dumb disciples. And then we're like, "Yes, yep." And then our takeaway in the end as a Christian people is like, God, you're so powerful. Like you're gonna put him under your boot. Like that's the whole narrative we cling to. Like Almighty God, and not that God is not Almighty, but like if we're learning, like, are we learning anything about the kind of power our God is interested in?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been
Yeah.
hit me recently. But so yeah, I'm not gonna spoil some of these other stories here, but there is a great one also in the resource about Christians for the mountains and mountaintop removal, and which is really good. And there's this one line in it that is that sort of names there's a deeper crisis, which is the loss of the community's power to envision a future not dominated by
Mm,
extraction and exploitation. I
yeah.
thought there's some good stuff there. And then there's another story about a community lighthouse project that is saving energy through battery storage as a means of grace and hub of resilience in a community. And I think that's a really good one too, because I think that's where a lot of the work is
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, before we move on to anything else, we'll kind of wrap up our time here in a minute. But I'm curious of like what are some of the other things that sort of hit you in this resource, or that jumps out, or that was your favorite part?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part of the production of the resource was, we had for the second time, we had a songwriting retreat at the farm of one of our board members, Sarah Macias, and we did three songs for Plastic Jesus, and they were decent. They were we had a weird theme to work with.
Yeah, it was the
Yeah,
opposite problem for that.
but
Yeah.
for this one, we had a more diverse group of songwriters. We had just it was a fun, real fun energy, and we ended up coming up with 7 original songs that are in the resource. The lyrics are in the resource. You can also download the music if you want to perform these in your church, and then we have recordings on our YouTube channel. But part of it for me is just the like recognition of how important it is to have good theology in our songs. to have good and to watch a process of people like I am my musical expertise did not move beyond high school band. So I appreciate musicians, but am not a very talented one myself. So like just getting to watch the creative process of people taking these theological ideas we were giving them and turn them into lyrics, and turn them into tunes, and to turn them into concepts. It was just a really beautiful process, and I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for the talented musicians that I got to spend a couple days with, and in a beautiful space, and great
Yeah,
conversation, and
yeah.
I really do hope that, I've gotten, since the resource came out, I have gotten some emails from people who have used the songs, and
Mhm.
that has been, and they've told me how well they've been received in worship, and that has just made me really, that's been really rewarding to hear. I love those kinds of stories.
That's really cool. I think that songwriters like this, like they're doing the actual work that we're all trying to do now, which is like put real material flesh on on this, right? On what we're talking about here. Like, so what does that mean for me and what I
Yeah,
do in the world, and like what are the songs of my life, and how does this framing change that and change what I do for the life of the world? And so yeah, that's really good. And I think it's also important to name that this resource, this is not about like like God's power is solar power. I think that that sort of, maybe with the imagery that we're playing with and that sort of thing, that's an easy kind of conclusion people are kind of thinking. But no, it's much more
mm,
complicated, right? It's relational, and
yeah,
it's right, because you could say, back to our Oak Flat story, right? I mean, they're wanting
right,
copper, and there's a good chance that that copper is for some myriad of technological, quote unquote, advancements that may end up back in our
yeah,
homes, and that sort of thing, and potentially in something that's going to be sold to us as, quote,
right.
green. And so this is complicated. And
Yeah, thank you for naming that, because and the Oak Flat piece was absolutely, with this, is that like it's not enough for us to build a green economy that's equally as extractive, a quote unquote green economy that does the same kinds of extraction. And like you said, the copper that is in Oak Flats could end up in batteries that are part of solar panels or part of all kinds of green infrastructure. But it's still being taken in an extractive way, in a way that dishonors the land and dishonors the people who have been tenders of the land. So it is. I mean, that's maybe one of the like root themes of this whole resource, is that like these things are really complicated. The ways we use power, the ways we produce power, the ways that we surrender power, all of it's all of it's really complicated. And yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's not a
yeah.
win to create an equally extractive economy that's greenwashed.
I think so much of the work ahead for us is playing more with this, about becoming
Mhm.
powerless, and in kind of multiple senses of the word there, and when it comes to, our energy use, and the ways that we think we're gonna power over this problem of the back to your limits, back to our, God has given us limits, so we can try to power over them, which we know is not going to work, or we can change course. And so yeah, that's really good. Well, maybe to end our time here, I'm going to try to share my audio screen situation, And I'd love for our listeners, for everyone listening, to get just a sample of one of these songs. And I'm going to say that, sorry, I can't do two things at once. I'm going to say that this is maybe one of the faves is the Join the Trees in Praise. And trees are that sort of technology, I'm going to say, that is so good, and that is one of those ways to think about, I'm going to say, power.
We are a part of the world, not the center of it. We are a part of the world, not apart from it, not apart from it. God give humility and creativity as we join the trees in praise, as we join the trees in praise. We are a part of the world, not the center of it. We are a part of the world, not apart from it, not apart from it. God give humility and creativity as we join the trees in praise, as we join the trees in praise. Our children come after us, they must live with what we leave. Our children come after us, they will share this air we breathe. We are a part of the world, not the center of it. We are a part of the world, not apart from it, not apart from it. God give humility and creativity as we join the trees in praise, as we join the trees in praise. Jesus of the redwood trees, Jesus of the bumblebees, heal us, help us, heal the earth. Jesus of the mountain high, Jesus of the soaring sky, heal us, help us, heal the earth. Jesus of the ocean deep, Jesus of the coral reef, heal us, help us, heal the earth. Jesus of the mighty gale, Jesus of the humpback whale, heal us, help us, heal the earth. Heal us, help us, heal the earth. Heal us, help us, heal the earth. We are a part of the world, not the center of it. We are a part of the world, not apart from it, not apart from it. God give humility and creativity as we join the trees in praise, as we join the trees in praise.
So good.
Shout out to Julian Reed, who is all of these songs were kind of written collaboratively, but he's the one playing the piano and was kind of the instrumental in that particular song creation. Talented guy.
Yes, we're gonna link that. It is. I was like, I was gonna stop it early, and I was like, where could I stop it? Like, no way. Like it just like it gets better as a song, and it hits the bumblebee part, and I'm like, oh man, it's my goal to like finally be somewhere like in person where this song is.
I know. Me too.
I want to feel it. I want to feel it.
We got to make that happen. We got to make that happen.
Dude, thank you so much for carving out some time here. I love talking about this resource, and I really hope it continues to find life. And folks, I'm going to link this in the show notes, and I hope that you'll consider engaging it with the season of creation coming up, or just in a myriad of different ways you can engage this with your people, or just yourself, your church, or however you want.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and thank you for all the work that you did on this resource, and for shepherding it across the finish line. Appreciate it.
Friends, it's season 3. Have you left us a rating yet? Because you might hurt my feelings soon. No, your input is everything. It's the wind beneath these wings. So please, I invite you to take a minute, leave a comment in the app that you're using, a star, a message, some googly eyes, anything. I'd just love to hear from you, friends. Until next time, grace and peace, y'all.